Wholeness and Balanced Vibrations. Thank you for joining us on Esoteric Radio. Today is Sunday, March 27, 2011. You're on the air with Sevan and myself, Moon. In today's show, we'll be bringing you down to earth in our series, No More Secrets. Now we are on the part 3 of the series. We've uncovered a lot already, and we haven't even scratched the surface yet. And daily, we each wish to change ourselves, and as a collective, change humanity. Yet how can we do this without knowing the true history of humanity? This and other topics will be covered on today's show, which is titled The Incorruptible Stone. Sevan has been working hard as always behind the scenes to take us to the next level in bringing out this knowledge. On the Resistance website, you will find Sevan's post on this topic and look forward to his audio recordings that will be following. For anyone who has questions during the show, you can contact us by dialing 347-996-5688. Press 1 to raise your hand so that we'll be able to see on the switchboard and get you on the air. You can also post your questions on Blog Talk Radio's chat box and, of course, the Resistance chat box if you are on the Resistance website. And if you are new to the Resistance, you'll get more information by checking out the Resistance website at www.resistance2010.com. There you will find a free copy and be able to download Sevan's book, The Code to the Matrix. You can also hear and see The Code to the Matrix on YouTube. Please check it out if you want to be in the know. And today there will be a special feature on deepening your meditation to advance it to the next level by using these Ayurvedic supplements, which are now available on the Resistance website. And we'll be hearing about that later on in today's show. But without further ado, I'll be turning it over to Sevan, who will continue along on the series, No More Secrets, Series 3, The Incorruptible Stone. Good day, Sevan.
Good day to everyone. Good day to the Resistance and guests. Wholeness and Balanced Vibration. It's just an incredible time that we're living in, and it's most fortunate to be here with you today. And what I really wanted to express to everyone today is that this last 2 weeks since the last time we spoke has been once again that telescoping effect that we always talk about when we refer to how the knowledge will continuously grow. And it's allowed me to see so many things and to look so much deeper into what is really going on in life. And through all of that, I've only wanted to express that to the world because it was always my idea that if the world was into the deeper knowledge and understood the deeper knowledge, that it would make the environment around us a lot more cohesive, and then we can all share that environment. So at this level, I've been able to relax somewhat in my mind. My mind has become very balanced. So it's a different way of ingesting all the knowledge. You're actually in the know about exactly what's happening and how you're capable of protecting yourself on multiple layers. And that really becomes not getting your mind hacked. And the key to not allowing that to happen becomes to unwind the mind and to make sense of it. And we started to find that the language that was put together was the main encoding process for our particular growth. And it took such a long time from my perspective to get to this level of knowledge. It's probably been aeons since this knowledge has been released to humanity. And I not only feel greatly honored to produce this knowledge, I also feel greatly responsible for continuing to make sure that it's available to everyone in every format. Now, I've been extremely cautious about what I've said, and I've had everything laying about in front of me just as the 64-bit cube, which is the dimension or the actual structure of how the game, as they call it, works. But unfortunately for the people that are too deep in whatever they're calling this game, it's not a game anymore. And I talked to a gentleman the other day, actually a gentleman sent me the email that I do respect a lot, of Mr. Freeman. And he said that you are supposed to be able to enter and exit many of these games or these numbers or these geometries or these frequencies at will. And that is what was lost. And what's going on now is an injustice because we have to be able to move on. And when I say move on, it doesn't mean that you leave your body and you die physically and then there's no more life for you here on this world. That's what I found out for sure not to be true. You actually moved on on all your levels, even your third dimensional level. And you moved into not only a different state of consciousness, but also a different area and a different frequency, because that's what controls the cell of the membrane of the DNA, is the environment itself. So what we have to look at now is that we have to look at what is our environment consisting of and what is our wavelength like? What is our biorhythm like? And that is mainly controlled when you look at an atom or you look at definitely an atom, you see that there are things adjacent to it, meaning there looks like a mini universe. And those are the things that are in proximity to you as an element. What you would know is that whatever is in your proximity is going to influence who you become. So if you have the next ring as a hydrogen and the next ring as a helium and the next ring, according to your order, is going to determine what the nucleus is like. And then in turn, the nucleus is reflecting what it wants to be like. So this is what I discovered. Well, I didn't personally discover it. It's been discovered a long time ago, but it's called the hollow movement. So when I say I've discovered something, that just means I found out for myself. I will say that there are higher worlds and they're very populated. Whether one gets there or not does not determine whether those worlds continue or exist. Case closed. So it's really for us to understand when they say, well, there's not a lot of people up there, you have no clue what you're talking about. In fact, there are many beings across the spectrum. It's just about what you're banding with. So we put up a post today, the post that accompanies this show. It's called the Incorruptible Stone. Because as we talked about last show, there was a heavy need for me to possess the ring. And what I meant by that is we discovered that the ending letter of a language is called the cabal or the cable because it connects to the front of the language. Now notice this. If you look on most people who have a keyboard that's very worn in, will notice the letters that are most worn in are an A and an S. And as we looked in the cipher, we discovered that the S was really a Z, and that there were actually various forms of the letter S, but mainly the Z. And what that made is that our alphabet does actually connect from beginning to the end with something of a cable. And that's what became the cabal. And when you were in possession of a language, what that meant was if you understood the complete language, then you were the master of the language. If you did not understand the language, you were the slave of the language. And that's why there was an original language and then it began to be broke up from there. Because what happens is there's a fractalization and a confusion. Now notice the word confusion only means the actual fusing together of kings or canes or coens. So what the word is really saying is when kings get together, this is what ensues. We have to understand that the words that we're using, English, have very specific meanings and they connect to very specific things. It's actually one of the most powerful languages to enter into this realm. But it's also the most tricky because language in itself is a lower form of communication when it's done vibratory, especially at a guttural tone. So generally the communication becomes communication of light. And communication, if there's any sound, very high-pitched sound is the communication of the higher being, if you want to give it that term. So when the guttural tones or gut came into play, then that's when we started to find a problem within the system. And I'll let people understand from this point that generally when these type of systems are running, these type of geometric worlds, the beings inside of them generally don't figure out that something is going on until way later on in the cycle. Because who's actually caused this has caused it for several reasons that we can just sum up to yin and yang. When you have two opposing forces, regardless of the smaller dynamics of what's going on, you have a very strong energy source because you have two forces that are opposite and they're pushing each other like pistons. Now, when you're inside of a system like this, it is still up to you to determine what part of the piston are you pushing. Are you pushing it up? Are you pushing down? And that's where a person inherits their own story, their own ring. That becomes like, for better lack of words, your aura. It's a disc, for better lack of words. And as you see on the first post-incorruptible stone, you see the rings around the person become the disc. And that's why in the movie Tron, they're attempting to get the disc from the creator because it says, if we have the disc, then we have everything. And so what ensued from this point with this knowledge that we call God science was the vibratory frequency of anything can be stored within a crystal and within sound. And oftentimes you got very foreign beings coming from the stars or the seeds. They came with the term star seed. And these seeds interacted with Earth. And we find actually that many seeds have interacted with Earth. What we call stardust, which is very deeper into astronomy and very deeper into physics. They've taken samples from the moon and samples from different places to get the stardust, because even just a piece of the dust allows a whole being to be generated if you have the proper technology, for better lack of words. And this technology is nothing like what we are seeing today and what we're using today. It's more organically and technologically interwoven. And so the main part of this understanding that we have to get today is that when you're on a dimension with illuminists, magicians, sorcerers, Kabbalists, high lamas, ascended masters, you have to ask yourself, who do you think is really in control? And that would, of course, be determined by whether you've ever accessed any of the real power associated with those titles. Because then you immediately begin to see, because you do have the all-seeing eye that can see light. And the reason why this eye can see light is because it's fully activated. And so what happens is that one of our paths to ascension is that we become conscious of everything that's going on around us. We become awake. And in order to do that, because you have the din or end, which means a place to sleep or where it's going to be over pretty soon, and you have this area that is the opposite spectrum. So you can either have an end, or you can go in the other direction, or you can have an end and be asleep, or you can go in the other direction and be awake and be active. And these are your only choices. So to wake up from the mind control, one has to understand where the mind is being controlled. So the mind is, of course, being controlled through the language. It's not the technology and things of that nature, just more finer tuning. But the language is the hard code. And so when understanding the language, you actually can pull it all apart and you can unravel yourself out of what we discovered is a pentagram. Now, what's interesting is that 72 times 5, which is 72 degrees on each angle of the pentagram, times 5 gives it 360 degrees. So it is true that this star is a perfect circle. Just like a triangle is 180 degrees, so two interlocking triangles is 360 degrees again. So these are exact what we would call MEs of this dimension, meaning they're the exact control module for third dimension. And understanding where these symbols come from and how they're put together opens up a vast world of what's really happening. So the first time you begin to figure out layers of what's happening, as we've all experienced, you tend to, if you're a very rational person, you take a break for a moment and you examine society, and then you ask yourself, can I see this going on somewhere else? So that I'm just not using my knowledge to determine what's happening. Can I find consistencies? Can I find things? And sure enough, when those are traveling the right path, we're able to find synchronizations within the whole reality as if there was a whole other story being told. For instance, like the movie The Matrix, everyone perceives to be one thing, but we find Neo is only one, who is Oannes. We find Smith, who's Cain, and we find the Merovingian, and we find none other than the Oracle of Delphi, and we find all the characters that are, and we find even Zion, and we find all the characters that are just associated with more of the problem. But the propaganda or the mind control is to push it to us as if there could be a solution. So I watched this for a while. I watched to see if they were telling the truth about this solution. That way I didn't overstep my boundary. But all the while, we were continuously giving people ways of activation. See, the thing is that just because we may be waiting on certain that I had to put things together while everyone fumbled over the knowledge. I watched the esoteric world. I watched all the major sites just to see if they were even going to catch on, or if they were going to reach back out and see if they wanted to put this on the show or something of that nature, but nothing. And that's when I started to understand that that's when we really had something, that we had unlocked something that others were locked out of. They could not see it because they were still veiled. They went so far, they went into space, and they went to other planets, and they went into communicating with other things, but all the while, on the real dimension, the actual dimension, nothing was really happening. And that has to be addressed. That's what a man and a woman does. They address when something is not happening, they go into it deeper, and so that's what I did. That's what I did first. So in digging into that, I discovered that we are smack dab in the middle of a Jehovian Saturnalian conflict. And the power behind and in the middle of both of these sources is so magnificent within itself that we are literally being compressed like diamonds with our experience. And then our experience is taking us either into one frame of mind or another. And so what we find is that we find people that are gravitating to a particular state of mind, and then that's even reflecting in the dimension and causing the dimension to crumble. And so thus, in this state, there are many that have waken up. And so the waking up process that's taking place here on the dimension that everyone is experiencing is because the language in their mind, the primary language on the dimension, which is called a language of light, is actually unraveling. Because what was literally going on is that the language itself was a light code to begin to program light beings from beings that know how to create other entities and essences through light, and shining them through crystals to extract their essence, and then animating their essence in fleshly beings or triangles, which are only 180 degrees because it's one piece missing to make something complete, to make it on the third dimension. So there's one triangle, and then another triangle is added that signifies the spirit, and then that creates the animated being. So there's been a story that has been ensuing for a prolonged period of time about the back and forth of this ancient knowledge being this pentagram and this hexagram being tossed back and forth like balls. what I literally figured out is that the power of the geometry and he who could weld the geometry or the crystals that correspond to the geometry was how one was equipped back in the day. So basically, as you've noticed, that in each crystal there is a specific shape, even like the dodecahedron shape is found in the garnet crystal. And many different crystals carry different shapes, some the triangle. So with the accompanying of these crystals and the essence of these crystals, creation for those who were into this high knowledge was not a problem. So what we literally have on our planet is somewhat of a separation between those beings and what appears to be the offspring, meaning that there were clearly some individuals that knew some light codes and programming, DNA, RNA, frequency, biorhythm, construction of atmospheres, using arcs and carrying DNA over periods of time and cultivating it and looking down upon the earth onto petroglyphs to see what was mating and how it was crossing over and extracting from the core and testing the core to see what the nutrients were and all of that. So how does mankind get to a point where all of that doesn't even appear like common knowledge? Actually appears like a science fiction movie. Something happened. So this is where you start to find your foundation, is you just say, well, something's happened. Because with light benders, the whole construct itself is really an illusion from the standpoint is that with illusionists who understands the language of light can actually program the dimension and do many things in the dimension. And so when one cannot do that, it's an extreme disadvantage. And in fact, it places you in the illusion because the light language, when connected, speeds up to the speed of light. So it's almost like when you learn the language of light, you speed up to the speed of light. Then when you learn the language of sound, you speed up to the speed of sound. When you learn the language of any of the essences, you speed up and sync up to their language. And that's how you gain your pure rings, meaning that you just went into it from the standpoint of understanding all there is, not from, hey, I'm trying to get this Ferrari and these gym shoes, and I want to have this girl fall in love with me, and I'm trying to get up there so that I can fight this. If you don't have a bearing on what's happening, you're actually so deep into the system, it's been no point for what they call the gods, the kings, the khans, the rulers, to even shine a spotlight on what you're doing because it's not even effective. Because the power itself is something entirely different than what most people are generally explaining in the mainstream. And this is now what's going to be revealed is what that's about. And I'm hoping personally that that's going to be done in enough time for people to regroup to what has been discovered. So the first part of this is understanding exactly what happened then in this time that we just left off of on the last two episodes, which was Mayat being the sea foam, for better lack of words, or what you would find when the water that we call the ocean has never been hit with a meteor or any type of extraterrestrial seed. That there's no physical life as we know it living in this plasmic field like the woman's fluids that are in her stomach when she's carrying a child. And this fluid in itself being in itself a virgin state, waiting to receive a seed or possibly already in existence and not even needing a seed. There's many people that argue back and forth about what the state of this planet was. But regardless of that, it receives seed. Now, it just so happens that the word seed or Cedar or Sat or Sa all connect back to the being Saturn. And so what was known in the deeper lore is that Saturn had become the father of many different beings that sprouted up later here on this planet. And it became an agenda to hide that identity in that story in order for a conqueror, which was the sun in this case, to take over the kingdom. And so this begins to be like story time once more, and everyone can kind of lay back for a quick moment and just listen to the story of the history of our world. But before we do that, I'm going to check the chat box and things of that nature just to make sure that we're okay with sound. Also, I'm going to make sure that I have a little bit of water so that I can keep this going. I know there's also a caller in the switchboard, and we'll be taking questions within the last 30 minutes of the show, and we'll also be talking about the Ayurveda. So if everyone would hold the line very briefly, we want to get prepared for this next segment of explaining exactly where we've come from and where we're at.
Wholeness and Balanced Vibrations. Welcome back, everyone. So Sevan just took a moment break, and now we're going to be getting back into the show. So we are going to be starting with the story, our true history.
Okay, so I just saw, again, the visualization technique would be great now for those who definitely practice the visualization techniques in their meditation. So how this really connects is, like, people would ask me, well, are you serious? Are you really actually saying that Saturn was the father here? Sevan, are you saying that Satan was like somebody's father? And then they act like over in the East right now with the Hindus and the Aryans that everything over there with them is not Sat, like Satnam, Satsang. And that when you trace the etymology of the names like Kukulkan and Cain, and you find that that Cain spread his knowledge and Saturn spread their knowledge throughout the world to the people that were there, promising them things in the future, et cetera, et cetera. And that is bona fide. So it's not really me anymore that has to tell the story. It's every single thing around you. So you tell me what you think. So what I discovered basically is that this being called Sat came into the atmosphere at a very high speed. And as it was coming in, there were fragments, which are also called, in this case, the angels, because it says the dragon fought with the Nike on the dragon fought and the angels fought on both sides. So what this meant was is that when the meteor was coming in, that there were fragments also. And then there was a splashdown into this Ma'at that we understand now, which is the essence of a virgin life. And the heat or extreme cold of those stones entering into that matter, when it's super cooled, you would find two things. You would find virtually a 0-point field, which would be how hot the combustion is in the implosion. You would find the spark that is found in laboratories to create the first sign of life within a sterile glass of water. And you will also find the essence, because this rock, wherever it's coming from, this asteroid, this meteor, etc., is carrying the essence of whatever it is. And it hits the water. From that point, it is known that there was a sprouting of El, or eel, which was a water snake, a sea snake. And this is why that is the beginning phase of the seed in a male system. It's basically a seaman or a seaman. So what happens from that point is that this worm type phase becomes the first point of metamorphosis in a generation of a being. We actually find that larva is the first point of something's creation. So we also understand from that point that the frequency of this worm or snake or whatever you want to call it is the primordial frequency. So So that's why there's always some times in history, because we talked about how the whole world is in ophilatria, 70% of the world is in the worship of the serpent. There is a yearning to go back and to return. As they say, it's an endless knot. And what we literally deal with now is we have a knowledge that allows us to say, well, it is an endless knot, but there is an endless amount of endless knots. And you can jump through them during their climax or perpetual or high points and remain continuously doing that consciously. Or you can get cycled through the wheels of time as a tree, as an essence, as a bird, as an advanced being, as a superconductor. Every single piece will fit into something. It's just about, can you guide your ship? So that's what the ancients were really discussing when they said that they had become activated. Was they had become active in proving and making sure that they don't get caught up in the end part of a cycle. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're now coming into these serpents that are really larvae, for better lack of words, that are roaming upon the waters. So we also understand that Earth did not just receive one host, or did not just entertain one person. The Earth began to entertain multiple consorts, or all sorts of cons. Now, if people don't think this has happened, then how do we get on a world full of cons unless somehow the world got involved with cons? Okay, so this is simple knowledge now. The easiest part of this now will be because it's exactly the time that we live in. So we got a chance to see what was really true and what was really false, and then make a decision if we could understand it, exactly what we were looking at, if we could take the time. Now, because Saturn is synonymous with time and known as the creator of time under a six-dimensional hypercube, or a six-sided cube, then we understand from that point exactly how to get in and out of the cycle, or do we? Because that's really being taught to people now, is that, oh, you can get in and out of the cycle and you can go to these places and you can do all these things, but yet the mass majority has gone nowhere. So when do we get to the point where we say, okay, let's rewind for a moment. Let's figure out exactly why it's not working and then regroup, instead of going on this tangent. And that's what the world abroad, especially those who are carrying the esoteric knowledge or professing to, need to do, is just go back to school. And so now what we find is that there obviously was an agenda of the being that had come into this planetary system to cultivate it or to civilize it, because it needed to build a kingdom. And what we literally witness is we witness the ancients being actually rulers that have some type of association with the serpent, but are fastly metamorphosizing from that to a bird type nature, and then metamorphosizing from that to an etheric nature, which is just nothing physical at all. So that we discover on a very large scope that the whole part about Earth is more or less a bait, that it's a womb. And when it receives the seeds, when the cycle becomes 3 and 6, there is which is 360 degrees, there are a certain level of things that are going to happen, and there's never anything beyond that going to happen. When you're looking for beyond that, you go to different systems, different levels of numbers, different levels of thought, different languages, etc. That's how you do it. To build the energy within oneself to do that, that is what meditation is about, through conjunction of breathing properly, cultivating the chi force which exists within man and woman. And what I've now discovered is keeping the proper balances and fire within the system so that you become fully conscious when you're piercing through these planes. Because people have to understand, if you look over in the East and you look over and deeper into Tibet and these places, what you find is you find these very old men that still have this large amount of energy and power. Not for the physical world. It takes far more power to operate yourself in the spiritual world. But to cultivate that energy and build that energy, because how we are constructed, you have to have the fire inside, as they say. And this is because the original being, one of the original beings that began to create things here was pure fire. And this is called Pi. And that's why we see the ultimate symbol is the uniting of fire and water. And the result of the uniting of that fire and water was mankind, woman, this creation. And the balances of that fire and water have swayed over time as it's attempted to balance itself. Because even in its core, there's a fusion. And this is what we experience within ourselves, is that we want to lash out and to handle and take control of things, but yet there's really no way to do that except for inside. Now, so what I started to discover is that there was a reason why there was a limitation on the power of being here, but the being was very powerful, meaning that this human. So many people would say, well, how did the human even come about? How did they start to be born? And what you'll find is that man's connection then came with known as the essences, which were what we call now the animals and the insects and the sea creatures, all in different measures. The essence that they first existed with was in this fluid. And when it brought life to it from a third dimensional serpent standpoint, it brought it into a physicality and it became mixed with the serpent. And that's why we witnessed within the first stages of a human gestation process in the womb, the baby first has reptilian features and then metamorphosizes into mammalian features. These became known as manes, which is Manes, which meaning man, and S, meaning serpent. So, in this hybridization, we find that there was one faction that was attempting to build a civilization. We find that there was another faction that was just attempting to keep that civilization under control. And those are the two struggling forces. So back in history, we find that there was an exit from the land of what they call Canaan. That the Bible that we know begins in the land of what they call Canaan. And this word has translated to us over time as Conan, which is still CNN, which is just all the vowels dropped from the word Canaan. And that this becomes the starting point for the major religions in this world. And so when the major religions in this world put themselves together, they were put together under one particular person called Abraham. And that word just means the children of the father Ham. And from that point, there were agreements made with Ham. There was agreements made by Ham to the God that they were in communication with. And those agreements came throughout time to haunt man and woman. And that is exactly the phase that we're unraveling ourselves from, which is the agreements that have been made across time that we didn't even understand what the agreements were really about. And so let's explain this. What I find is that you have a certain class of beings that have the power of bending light. And when you have the power of bending light, you're capable of creating an illusion. So anyone else that's actually watching that and witnessing that is perceiving that to be so much power and magnificence that it immediately cowers that being. So in the beginning of this planet, any being that was halfway intelligent was cowered by these serpent force beings that carried this electric energy. And from that point, there was a development and a civilization. So when they say that Mesopotamia became the seat of civilization, what they're just saying is that the first time civilization began, where something started to become civilized, this is where it started taking place. And so what we have there is we have the king sitting on his throne, beginning to cultivate the world and issue the knowledge from the world to the world and to populate and seed the world. And because it is so entwined with the world, and this is because there's now children that are both serpent and both mammal mixed in one, that there won't be a separation until either one dies or somehow they both come into harmony. And this becomes known as the dual serpent in the body, or the Kundalini force. So many myths have been told through time, and because there's multiple frequencies, these stories actually took place. So we can either get involved in just the story, or we can get involved in exactly what it really means. And so this is called cutting through it. What we have is we have these two fluids within our body residing in the base of the spine. In the base of the spine, these energies are so strong, it is known that they must be kept asleep, generally. This was deemed the case because the use of this energy turns on what is called the all-seeing eye. From this point, the person is a parent of other light, meaning that they actually bend light themselves when their Kundalini force is turned on. So when light is bending light, meaning an illusionist is bending an illusionist, it cancels out both illusions. So you see what the world really is, which is basically a construct, a format, even no floor, a blank space. And it is our hollow movement through it, which is deemed karma. Everything that we do at every single moment at a certain point on the wheel that ends up turning the wheel, causing our reactions and causing what happens, that is the actual world that we're living in. And this is set up as cogs of time in which we exist on each dimension of these cogs, which have the numbers, they say, of 4, 7, and 11. And that they are dimensions that are the control points of this time, and the one that we're currently in allows us to do things and then not see the results of them later, but we are still seeing the results of something that we've done. And it happens so slow that we actually forget that that's something that we asked for, or that's something that we evoked, or that's something that we said, especially since we don't understand the language. So what you find basically with your star, with your energy, is that it's out of control. It doesn't have any firm foundation, any anchor point, any nail, any axis. And to give it that, to balance oneself and to get into the higher states of consciousness that are the rewards of deep study and to deep meditation, to me, I've discovered you have to unhack the reality. And so we spend a lot of time every day talking about exactly what's going on and what's happening in the world and what happened before with the fathers and how there were serpent beings and how we eventually got here and now we have these dilemmas that we're trapped inside of these nets and we don't really understand what's out there or how we can expand beyond this if we're using the same construct that we're meditating on and imagining here. So we find ourselves in what they call a conundrum. And this is because the energy has been more or less removed from the body. The body just does not have the power to project itself beyond the reality. So what I discovered is that had already been solved. And we've all sat in deeper groups for at least 6 months, 7 months, 8 months doing deeper meditations, and we've definitely been able to reach some higher spaces. But we haven't necessarily been able to touch constantly, many of us, this higher consciousness level and be able to remain there and be able to keep energy in our body that we can actually transfer to others. Because remember, a fully activated human can touch others or come in contact with others and it actually changes them. So what I discovered is that the body had an extreme imbalance. And what we're putting together is we're putting together a book called The Ascent, because the mind, body, and soul itself is experiencing an extreme imbalance because of the trauma of how this planet came into existence. Meaning all of these wars back and forth between Jehovah and Saturn and the children, all these conflicts with the mother goddesses and them attempting to gain control or to cease things from happening and failing, all of this has left a scar on us and a scar on our biorhythm. To replace that and to repair that is your responsibility. But to get to it, you have to go deep within. And so this is a large part of what we're working on now is, yes, to show people what the history is, but we're more familiar with things that are very painful here. But how to repair that pain and how to soothe that pain so that we can actually begin to harmonize the frequency again is what we have to be into during this segment when our energies are the strongest. Now, lately we've been experiencing some of the highest points of the moon, meaning that the highest magnetic forces have been coming into our planetary sphere, and even the solar flares, etc. It is supposed to be that these flares and these cycles are supposed to turn you on in a major way. If you find yourself in a dilemma where that is not happening, it's important now that people come forward and say, hey, it's not happening for me, what should I do? Because that's where the healers move in. And the women have to realize is that that's where their role was always as the healers. And the men have to realize that their role always was to protect. And with healing and protection, there's nothing can penetrate you. So what happens is that I encourage everyone to get deeper into the Ayurvedics now, which is the balancing of the system. I encourage everyone to use precautionary measures to protect themselves from the electromagnetic fields. I encourage people to practice getting the fluoride out of your water with the MMS, because this is the exact jump point. And I will explain also that me personally, just me myself, I've jumped to the higher regions in consciousness. In physicality, I've made a sacrifice, which is simply to remain here, to ground oneself. Now, this sacrifice is very important because it's just the same as anything that we do when we break a habit or we decide to give up something in order to enjoy something greater. And to me, there's nothing greater than everyone being able to enjoy the high knowledge and then moving into other spheres and seeing people that you knew from here that got there. Like, hey, I knew you on Earth. Man, imagine how it was there. In order to be able to walk you through that completely, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to completely open up to you about not only who I am, not only what I've experienced, but also the exact state that I'm in real time, so that there becomes more or less another archetype. And we'll explain what an archetype is. What I believe personally is that there was always a knowledge that the flood, around the time of the flood, that many of the beings that lived on the planet, no matter what they were, humanoid, reptilian and human, or strictly reptilian, or insectoid, or whatever, were having in their astral light or astral consciousness warnings that something very disastrous was going to take place, and they would need to preserve things. These terms became known as build an ark. So it wasn't just one group of people that built an ark. As they talk about, arks were everywhere. And what the arks really were things that were impenetrable, meaning they cannot be destroyed by fire or water. And one of the main elements that cannot be destroyed by fire or water are crystals, especially the diamond. So, because this knowledge was already known by a certain group of individuals, they preserved themselves in stones. because they knew that they could always tap into the life force and the frequency that was going to sprout up on this planet from the previous seeds. Because remember, when the seed is planted, there will be no stopping it growing because of the roots. You would have to pull it up from its roots. But because the tree in our particular planet has such deep roots, there will be no pulling it up from its roots. But to find the roots and to see what's down there is what they literally knew as the darker version of the occult, because then you understood what the underworld was really about. Neglecting to know what that was really about was just excluding one part or 180 degrees of your cycle. So there became an agenda to not allow people to know what their history was, who their descendants and ascendants were, and to give them a story that connected to something else that would take more power away from them. Because remember, when you have the power of knowing who you were, nothing can convince you that you don't have that power. Because you think, well, I know where I come from. That's my name right there. And what happens is that we now have to access that power within in order to change the environment of our planet. And we have to come through for our planet. I will say that it's going to take many of us to spread across this globe like waypoint to begin to activate people, but that is a plan and an idea that cannot be stopped, because there is now a total realization coming to many of exactly what the language is really saying and how we're under control, but that's coming to a group of people that will not accept that. And I'll explain this. Many of the ancient language, from what I've discovered, tell very directly who the ruler is. They say very directly that it's the serpent. The serpent is the ruler. However, so these people have grown up knowing this and accepting this. But in the Western world, in places like the United States, it was not told directly. I believe that moment was for those who are raised in that type of culture to do something about the constricting of the controller on our environment, to release our environment from the clutches of this constrictor, or this one who possesses the venom, or the snake coiled around the tree, which is the dollar sign. So what it takes a person to do that is become what they gave the term as avatar. This just means a special person born somewhere where they become of the knowledge that they're this graduated being, and they're here to deliver their essence to this planet, to get it to another level and to release it from its prison. That's actually what we're dealing with now. And what I've seen this is not from a fairy tale standpoint, not from a movie standpoint, not from a comic book standpoint, but from an actual reality and actuality standpoint. That there are many people here that are 100% confirmed as individuals to take this planet into a higher level of ascension. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a look into the chat box for a moment, and to make sure that I'm able to answer all the questions here today. And if everyone would just give me a moment. Also on the Resistance, that's www.resistance2010.com. Post. And I put a lot of time in finishing that last night. And but the ultimate conclusion that we're coming to is that we are the ones that are going to change things, and we have the ability to do that. Understanding the knowledge is to understand that the essence and the power in this planet is phenomenal. To tap into it is to open up the storage of the abilities that you have inside of you. As you see that many beings are depicted with jewels encrusted inside of themselves, and it's known that the whole idea of this light being, this serpentine being, was that it just had light vehicles or wheels inside of it. Now, what the human has discovered is that they're inside of them too. So most people would want to reject this type of thing if they were under any of these type of religious systems. They would say, well, no, it's not any type of light system inside of me. It's just a spirit. But when we've actually been able to witness it in deeper meditations, we see that we have these light wheels inside of us. So I suggest we should probably use those to deal with the situation that we're handling now. And I would also know that that people have already begun to do that. And those are the individuals that are reaching out and giving them as much information as they can without overstepping the boundaries of just exactly making the choice for a person about what they should do. And so now that we're more into the final segment of the show, I wanted to get into the Ayurvedics and how it exactly works. But before I do that, I'll talk really briefly about what they're preserving to answer the question of Blake of what was the Ark of the Covenant preserving. Now, in many cases, there is a self-preservation, and I have some videos that are going to accompany this show this week. And those videos are going to be getting a lot more deeper into this, and they're already recorded. But what they were actually preserving at times was self-preservation, sometimes within a stone, where you had a grand being, meaning a being with a large amount of essence and energy, putting itself into a prism, a stone, or something of that nature, and then the descendants of that individual or whoever was to come upon that stone would keep it and carry it with them as a communication link to the deity or the essence of the stone. In addition to that, in many cases, the languages needed to be preserved because many of the languages are extraterrestrial languages and actually lead to other dimensions. And those languages needed to be preserved for the future civilizations in order to keep the population and keep the species going. Because really when it boils down to it, when you look at what would be the whole reason of any type of creation, you understand that it has something to do with preservation. Whether it's food, whether you're trying to preserve yourself because you need to make food, whether you're trying to preserve yourself because you need to have a descendant and an ascendant, whether you're trying to preserve yourself because you need an animated being that lives on a dimension outside of time, there's many different ideas that will come across a very advanced being's mind about how to preserve who they are. And that's why the Tower of Babel says, let us go, they said, the children of men said, let us go and make a name, lest we be scattered amongst the plains, because they had just witnessed themselves the cataclysm. What this is about is that once you have a name, then all of the energy from that name allows you to remain alive as long as you remain connected to that name, and that name is originally yours. This also produces a very difficult situation for individuals attempting to free themselves from the system because they have to end up becoming non-name orientated. And I'll explain why. What happens is that if a person thinks highly or lowly of you, they say, I don't like, and then they use the name. But because the name can correspond to something else, they actually send that energy to something else through that individual that's taken that name. So what it talks about there in the deeper novels of the meditation, which is not really even written, it's just about getting there, you start to release yourself from certain levels of the identity that you understand that is more corrupt. So what happened is that I went into a deeper level of seeing how the realities were put together, and it led to that definitely we were here going through a process, but the process had already been complete by many individuals. Once those individuals once you came onto that frequency, those individuals began to help you along the path. It's the same thing that I'm doing now with giving you the information and you connecting to me on the website and you connecting to the resistance and all the people that are there. So what literally happens for all of us is that we become an internal bridge for people to get into the higher levels of knowledge and then understanding exactly where they are on this level so they understand what they have to do. The balance of our body is the most important thing in that when you move into the higher phases, because what I could literally do more than talking is it's easier for me to type, it's easier for me to make a movie and do it because I have a direct interface with my mind and the tool that I'm using. And I have an opportunity to see what's before me, just like when you're using a language that's supposed to be a light projection and you understand it, you can see what's in front of you and then you can learn how to put it exactly together in order to convey the right message. So this is how it has to happen from here. And I wanted to let everyone know that that we definitely want to move into the higher state of consciousness with everyone. And to do that from this point, we're going to need to show everyone a few things about the reality and show them how it all connects as we've always been doing. But we're also going to need to connect to people on a higher level. And what this involves is this involves us beginning to go participate in the meditation sessions and beginning to build the energy and to begin to receive the proper instructions on how to build the energy through your system so that it doesn't become chaotic and it doesn't leave you in a field where you feel like you're not accomplishing something. And so what I'm going to do from this point is that I'm going to take a brief moment to take the calls that are on the line. And like I said, the post again today about the Incorruptible stone is on the resistance. We have a lot of recordings coming that are going to get a lot deeper into exactly what the language means, what the whole goal of it was, how certain things can be turned around. But to do that, of course, it has to become a lot more expansive than just having a back and forth chat. And so I'm going to open up the lines to area code 505, and I'm doing that now. Actually, that caller has actually left the line. So what we're going to do from here is I wanted to advise everyone, of course, where those links were on the site if you wanted to check out the Ayurvedic knowledge and exactly what it does and exactly how it balances its system. What I'll just explain to you very briefly of what it has done for my body. Generally, during the meditation, there's a lot of information coming in and a lot of questions that you're asking. What happens is that they say when you're receiving knowledge, if you're actually talking, it's very difficult to actually absorb the knowledge. So anyone that's actually talking while another person is teaching is not really learning. So what happens is it's important to quell the mind, and we learned that the major part of that was to focus on your breathing. What happens when you focus on your breathing is that you begin to become more conscious of each breath that you take. But for the Western mind still, or the mind that's immersed in the chaotic frequency, there's still at times an interruption, whether it's a beep, whether it's a refrigerator, or whether it's any type of object that's distracting you to take you away from the meditation. But where do you need to remain most of the time, even while you're working? You would need to remain in that frequency, the alpha frequency that allows you to comprehend and to absorb all things around you, not just directly what you're focusing on. To do that, you have to enter into what I term the zone. And the zone exists when you're completely comfortable where you are. But if your environment around you is chaotic, how can you be comfortable where you are? So you first must project inside this environment of balance. And then the reality itself bows itself down to your calm and your patience and your understanding, your outer standing, etc. Once you tap into this higher level, then you begin to tumble the stone, as they call it, which means you actually begin to look at life. You begin to look at your experiences with different people and different places, your work, your job, the names of those places. All this you begin to see exactly where you are in time. And this begins to allow you to understand exactly how to move it around. How you move your life around is every single move that you do make, it causes a karmic reaction. And karma is not necessarily karma. There's always the term dharma. But if we just use the term karma, we can say just a way of programming the future. What you do now can determine what happens ultimately the next time the wheel comes around. And in addition to that, with more energy inside, you can speed the wheel up. So the speeding up of this wheel is going to need to take place within the male and the female now, because we have a great transition to make. We're witnessing our world continuously doing the same things. It's not even so much as us focusing on, well, maybe this stuff happens all the time. We always get major earthquakes, even though this is the biggest one. It's always this cold, even though it's not been exactly this cold for this long. But there's many things that are happening now that we have to take a look at our reality and say, well, wait a minute. Did I miss something? And so what I'm here for is I'm here to tell you exactly what has been missed. And it's not so much as what we miss, but it's almost what we keep skipping over. And it's just the obvious. If you're talking and you're saying something and words create your reality and you don't understand what those words mean, you begin to send energy into places and into things that you don't know about. The most powerful phase is in your stillness of breathing and bringing up your energy inside. Talking sends your energy out into the environment to the corresponding energies of what you're saying, which is totally different than what you think. So what we have to find ourselves doing now is talking a lot less with our mind, talking a lot less with our mouth, and talking more with our spirit in the deeper levels of our mind in order to gain what we want. When we talk about what we want, we have to connect that directly to everything that we're already connected to. So we have to connect to, well, what do we want for them? What do I want for the person that's next to me? Because if they're going to be with me and there's no way that I can separate from them, then I have to get enough energy in order to help them see what I see, turn them on. So there we have it. We will continue to talk about the story later on and then definitely in a different format, more through videos and things so people can see all the synchronicities, they can see all the pictures, they can see all of the language. We're going to continue to talk about how we've graduated through history and what direction we've been going in for a long time. We're going to talk about how to go into a different direction precisely. We're going to only deal with things that we know work, meaning that things that go beyond whether you want to believe them or not, but take you to the level that you want to be so that you can access what you need to access. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and conclude with this, because we have 19 more minutes remaining in the show. I know that for everyone that a lot of this stuff is very difficult to ingest because this is the first, we're being explained this basically out of nowhere. It's just like the guy that I just saw in the chat room. He says, I'm taking myself out of the chat room and for better lack of words, I've taken you off my favorites list. Because the fact of the matter is a great deal of the information becomes very difficult for being in the state of consciousness of one being bombarded by the frequencies and one being manipulated by life and in the illusion to handle. That's a fact. So in order to graduate people beyond that and to get them prepared for what's beyond that, then the one who is teaching or the one who is instructing has to find that for everyone and has to find how it all works. And so while we've had a lot of joy on this adventure by the discovery, we've also had a lot of pain in the discovery of what's happened to our genealogy, what's happened to our frequency, what's happened to our species, what's happened to our kin, what the decisions that have been made by instinct. And we find in there many different things that are difficult to take. But when we take it, it becomes the bitter elixir that actually produces what is the ultimate reward. I find a lot of the most enhancing herbs to be very bitter and very difficult to palate. But when you've ingested them and it's in your body, it begins to work on your system. And so we always have to keep that in mind, that that is the general application of making something as great as you will become now, and that you've already been, which is the compression of the Christ or the crystal, the stone. And they show that this stone is in your head, and that's why when you're doing the meditation, you feel a lot of pressure within the head. And you feel the pressing together of something that they call the pineal, because it's ready to burst forth. And that's what we want to get everyone into. We want to get them into bursting forth with this light, with this language of manifestation, with this totality of understanding how to control matter, meaning making your ladder connect, being able to keep your mind in the higher states of consciousness while you operate on the lower plane, and dealing with shepherding, for better lack of words, your people, because we have to take care of our seeds. Remember, the main thing that still has to be understood here is that the mother goddesses, the ones that remain into the proper frequency, always knew that no matter what happened here, that they had to take care of this planet, and they had to continue to heal this planet. It was never an option for them to leave this planet and to leave behind their own children, etc. While many of the father beings or the masculine spirits reserved always the opportunity to seed and just leave their seed as the ruler or the son. And that's what the post is uncovering with the incorruptible stone, is that the son became the ruler over the kingdom of his father. And connecting all of our bloodlines together, all of our frequencies together, is the only way to do that, is to show where we're all alike, where the place is that we all do connect. And some say, well, do we all possess these chakras? Does everyone have chakras? What I know is that everyone at least has one chakra. And with that, everyone is somehow connected. And we talk about the neo-universalism, or the idea of everyone coming together and speaking the universal language, and which is the language of sending out what you feel and what your mind and body and soul is really saying, all in one form. To do that, where that is constructed, it's constructed in the higher levels of the meditations. And so also what I'll be doing, and the breathing mainly. Everyone should keep in mind that to me, it's the breathing. The meditation is the moment. It's the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to go meditate. But the breathing itself is what gets one into the higher states of consciousness. The chi fluid inside the body is what powers the wheels of consciousness. It was wired this way so that you would not achieve the higher states of consciousness until you mastered the first wheel. The first wheel itself is the wheel of fire. It's all of what can and cannot be done with that energy, this fire, light energy. And we've seen many people turn that part of themselves on, and this is many of the actors and stars, and they've used that energy, and they haven't been able to graduate beyond it. And now we get a chance to see the step-by-step of how to graduate beyond that. And what I wanted to also do is I actually wanted to talk about, before the show was over, I wanted to talk about a few of the individuals in the resistance that have just been doing phenomenal work. And it's important that we always recognize who is with us. And I wanted to thank Mune for definitely being here and being available to produce such phenomenal work, and also to be able to organize things in a way where things can really get done here with the Resistance family. I want to thank Gene Pablo, Mr. Spirit Matter, for coming in and putting together all of the Code to the Matrix video series, and also being available to illustrate things with us for the future books and the future dossiers that are coming up. I wanted to thank Andre Holmesburg for his phenomenal work with the website, esotericlibrary.com, and all the websites that we have coming up to assist members in going to a to Z or 1, 2, 3 version of the ascension process, but just still basically based on whether they want to be active in the system or not. As I always say, we can pay attention to the time to let us know what's happening, and we can always see when it's the beginning of the book or more towards the end. In the post, you'll see that we've always had the ability to go and make a cycle into a primary phase and jump into a cycle during its primary phase. And in fact, I believe we've been doing that all of our existence, whether we've been conscious of it or not. It's just time for you to grab the wheel as a younger being, obviously, no matter how many aeons you stretch across. Still not being conscious completely of yourself shows your age. But to be completely conscious and to graduate into that phase and to understand how to get there and when you're not there yet. And once again, like I said, there's an anatomy to the body. I did post in the Ayurvedic Gene post, Mantak Chai's Orgasmic Man. What I'm also going to be doing is I'm going to be getting more into the healing techniques of woman, because her body is wired slightly different. And her energy comes from mainly she can project energy from certain places. And it becomes more or less a catalyst to the energy that is accompanied by man. In addition to that, to show each of us how to turn those energies on separately inside of us in order to cultivate those fluids, in order to have the energy that it takes to go throughout the day and to go throughout our plane with staying charged up and being able to give people energy. I wanted to take also this point to talk more from the heart, because there's been a lot of data coming across the channel a lot, and even these days I'm definitely very, unless I'm writing it or I'm doing it in a video, it's very difficult for me to just speak what's happening, because I see so many things at one time. I get it in like a very fast language, and it takes a long time for me to translate that now into English. But I found that I can translate that better into script and into video. But that's one level of talking. The talking from the heart is a greater way to just express to people where you are. And what I want to express to people is that, man, we've come a long way. Man and woman, we've come such a long way. Literally showed that we were in a cocoon, and then we morphed from the cocoon into another phase where we were ready to fly. We were ready to go out into what life was really about and into existence. And we discovered many things, and we discovered what exactly stops a person from doing that. And that can only be the reason why we haven't done it. And what I want to let people really understand in their heart is that what stops you from getting there is just not knowing about it. Once you know about it, meaning once you know about the deeper knowledge and how this all connects, you get to the next level. There was never anything to stop you from getting to that beside that you were not ready for. It takes a totally different level of understanding to perceive what's really being said on a deeper level when you speak of higher things. That's why in the meditation you start to, into the proper breathing, you start to feel more of what's happening rather than see it in some pictures or some movie and things of that nature. But you find so many things that actually connect. I wanted to also talk about, now that I'm experiencing another thing, I wanted to talk about conductivity. This was something interesting that I found out. That when wearing silk, I noticed that there was like an electric charge that was taking place within just a static electric charge. And we've definitely identified that energy is the conductivity of the energy of our body. But why is it that many of these fabrics, like the nylons and the rayons and these different fabrics, don't even build that static electricity? And we find this because those fabrics do not conduct properly, and that silk and amber rubbed together actually made electricity. So you can also look at that there's materials that you should wear, and this stuff is not really expensive, during your meditations that allow you to contain more energy within, just allows you to contain your energy while your energy is not being pulled out by maybe the clothes you're wearing or the symbol on the clothes, the labels on the clothes, etc. And so that's why this new book, The Ascent, has to be written, because we have to take apart the reality piece by piece and actually show where we have to correct certain things in order to actually turn on. And that's the only thing that can be determined to me as high knowledge. So what we're going to be taking a call, which is area code 813. We're just going to open up the line for the caller very briefly to see if the caller wants to be ask a question.
Hello. Hi, sir.
Caller from the 813 area code, you're on the line. Thank you for calling Esoteric Radio. Do you have a question?
Hi, this is Anthony. The only thing that I had on my mind was if you could elaborate on any information involving quantum communication.
Sure, the quantum communication, and that's the main reason why we're getting into this language now so deeply, because it is a quantum communication. What they're basically explaining is that there's these dimensions, and the easiest way for me to explain this without getting deep into how dimensions are constructed and different things of that nature is to understand a lag time. That basically you're in a dimension that has a certain amount of lag time. So what you do doesn't really happen until later on. And it happens so late that because of the energy and how fast you're moving, that sometimes it's forgot about. But when people start to manifest faster, they start to see their manifestation around them in synchronicities and things of that nature, even when they've just thought about something. That's why they say, I just thought about a person and they called. This is because the synchronization is and the person's will is moving a lot faster, and they're starting to see their manifestation because they're using this quantum language. Now, this quantum language, I will tell you, only extends to a certain point. But how can we get to another point if we don't at least extend the point in which we're already at? So what I'm saying is that these letters, which are really symbols, and how they connect to each other and how they make other shapes, is that quantum language. But there are also others that, as you get closer to what the original languages are, basically with English, it's now not in its original state, but we've discovered charts, as we see on this recent post, of how the English originally was. But we can still see that particular language is only one shape. Going into other languages opens you up into another quantum field, and that's why the languages were kept and coveted very closely, because they were what was called the Mays or the MEs from the Sumerian text. So what we have an opportunity to do now is we have an opportunity to even look into what I discovered is, because everything, and when I talk about light, and people need to get it very clear, this is not the light from the light worker's standpoint in Lucifer, who they don't even understand is a woman, and who is Lu or Luluwa, which is from the Sumerian text. This is about red, green, blue, purple. This is about when you put 40,000 hertz, or let's say even 20 million hertz, into an amplifier of a photon spectrum, and you see a light that corresponds to 20 million hertz. And then that light that you see turns into a shape, if you could see it on the right level. And that's why even the computer screen has a way of making the eyes see hexagrams or the star of light, because when you look really deeply into the pixel is a hexagram. And so when the eye is constantly focusing in and focusing out, it sees that, but that's not what it's basically allowing us to see. And so there's another part that activates this quantum language that's very important, which is the actual visualization that comes from the mind. These visualizations can be powered up through the chakra systems because it's very simple videos that keep explaining this, and whether people believe it or not or want to be able to tap into that ability is really on to them. But the ability to actually project holophonically doesn't turn on until you get into the higher chakras in the head, because that's what those nodes and antennas are really for. Then everything just becomes light, spectrums and frequencies and shapes and sounds, etc., from a different level of communication. So what literally needs to happen first is that because the primary root chakra is being used, primary root chakra communication is that of 3 and 6. It's everything that can be made with the construct of a 3 or a triangle and a 6, which is a cube. And so we do, I'm sure we pretty much got that question covered, but we can also get into it a lot deeper on some of the posts in the future, because it definitely connects into what we're talking about. We have 90 seconds left within the show, so what we're going to do is we're definitely going to close out here. I'm going to encourage everyone to just stay really close to the bulletins and things of that nature on the website. We're going to be posting things. I've actually pre-recorded this show already. I've said all this already one time, which is also one of the reasons why I kind of scattered around this conversation. But I will be posting all of the cohesive recordings of this knowledge that's being presented right now. And everyone knows how to get in touch with us on the resistance. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mune so that she can go ahead and take us out of here. I'm sending wholeness and balanced vibration to everyone. Brother, I wanted to thank you also for calling in, and also thank all the members of the resistance and guests for participating today.
Thank you so much, Sevan, and this was an amazing show, and we're all looking forward to these future posts that you're posting. For those that were looking for the Ayurvedic supplements, you will find them on the resistance2010.com website under nutrients. So that's for the Ayurvedic supplements to deepen your meditation. And of course, it's good to keep your body in a high alkaline and balanced state to receive the higher benefits of these supplements. So everyone, wholeness and balanced vibrations to you, and have a wonderful day.